Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of horror stories that you can listen to while you fall asleep. Before the video begins, let us know what time is it and where you are listening from. Also, if you have suggestion for next horror story settings, let us know in the comments. Now let's begin. The confession. I need to tell someone what happened. The police closed the case, said there wasn't enough evidence, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard, and I know why Sarah never came home that night. It started 3 months ago when I moved into the apartment above the Hendersons. Nice elderly couple, been married 40 years, always brought me cookies and asked about my job at the bank. Mr. Henderson would wave from his garden every morning as I left for work. Mrs. Henderson knitted me a scarf for winter. They seemed perfect. The first strange thing was the smell. It drifted up through my floorboards some evenings around dinner time. Not cooking smells. Something sweet and chemical, like cleaning products mixed with something organic that had gone wrong. I mentioned it to Mrs. Henderson once while checking my mail. "Oh, that's just Harold's hobby," she said, her smile never wavering. "He refinishes furniture in the basement. Always tinkering with something down there." I accepted that explanation. People have hobbies. Then I started noticing the visitors. Always young women, always alone, always carrying suitcases like they were moving in. I'd see them knock on the Hendersons' door from my kitchen window. Mrs. Henderson would answer with that same warm smile, usher them inside quickly. The strange part was, I never saw any of them leave. Sarah was different. She was my age, maybe 25, with auburn hair that caught the light when she walked up their front steps last Tuesday evening. I watched from my window as Mrs. Henderson opened the door. But this time, Sarah seemed hesitant. She kept looking over her shoulder, clutching her phone. I should have done something then. I should have gone down and introduced myself, offered to help with her bags, anything. Instead, I made dinner and tried to forget about it. The screaming started around midnight. It was muffled, coming from somewhere deep in their house, maybe the basement Mr. Henderson supposedly used for furniture. At first I thought it might be their television, some late-night movie. But televisions don't make sounds like that. Sounds of pure terror, of someone begging for help in a voice raw from screaming. I called the police. They knocked on the Hendersons' door the next morning. I watched from my window as Mr. Henderson answered, still in his pajamas, looking confused and concerned. The officers asked their questions. He invited them in. They stayed maybe 10 minutes. The officer who came to my door afterward was young, looked tired. The Hendersons explained everything, he said. Their niece Sarah is staying with them. She has night terrors, sleepwalking episodes. They've been dealing with it for years. The family is looking into medical treatment. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. But that afternoon, I saw Mrs. Henderson in their backyard, hosing down plastic sheeting near their garden shed. The water ran pink down the drain. The smell got worse over the next few days. Sweet and chemical, and something else now, something that made my stomach turn. I started keeping my windows closed, but it seeped through anyway. I began having dreams about Sarah, about her auburn hair and the way she'd looked over her shoulder. Yesterday, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until I saw the Hendersons leave for their weekly grocery trip. Then I picked the lock on their basement door. My hands shook so badly, it took me 20 minutes. The basement was clean. Too clean. The concrete floor had been scrubbed with bleach, so strong it burned my eyes. Plastic sheeting covered the walls. In the corner sat a chest freezer, humming quietly. I knew I shouldn't open it. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to call the police, to run. But I had to know about Sarah. I had to know about all those young women I'd seen enter, but never leave. The freezer was full of meat. Packages wrapped in white paper, labeled with dates and cuts. Tenderloin, March 15th. Chuck roast, February 3rd. Ribeye, March 20th. The last package was labeled Sarah, March 28th. I vomited right there on their clean floor. Then I ran upstairs and called the police again. They came with a warrant this time. I watched from my window as they carried out box after box of evidence. The Hendersons were arrested that evening. The news called them the suburban cannibals, said they'd been killing and eating young women for over 2 decades. But here's what keeps me awake at night. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. When the police arrested Mrs. Henderson, she looked up at my window. She saw me watching, and she smiled that same warm, grandmotherly smile she'd given me for months. Then she mouthed 2 words that made my blood freeze. "You're next. The trial starts next month. Their lawyer says they'll plead insanity. The prosecutor says they'll seek the death penalty. Everyone assumes they'll be locked away forever. But I know something nobody else knows. Something I found when I went back to look at the basement one more time. There's a tunnel behind that chest freezer. A tunnel that leads to the storm drains under our neighborhood. A tunnel that connects to dozens of basements, dozens of houses, dozens of places they could hide. I've been getting packages at my door. White butcher paper tied with string. No return address. Inside, there's always meat. Fresh meat. And a note that says compliments of the Hendersons. The police say it's probably some sick prank. Copycat behavior. They've increased patrols in the neighborhood. But I know the truth. I know that Mr. and Mrs. Henderson aren't the only ones. I know their hobby was a family business. And I know that right now, somewhere in the tunnels beneath my feet, someone is preparing my next delivery. I worked the graveyard shift at Mercy General Hospital for 3 years before I realized what was really happening in the East Wing. Now I can't sleep. I can't eat. And I can't stop checking the locks on my doors. It started when they moved me to the geriatric ward. Budget cuts, they said. Consolidating staff. I didn't mind at first. Night shifts in elderly care were usually quiet. Most patients slept through the night, and the ones who didn't just needed water or help getting to the bathroom. Dr. Brennan ran the East Wing. 30-year veteran, respected by everyone. The other nurses called him a saint for dedicating his career to end-of-life care. He always stayed late, checking on patients, updating charts. Sometimes I'd see him there at 3 in the morning, just sitting beside someone's bed, holding their hand. The first thing I noticed was how peaceful the deaths were. In my previous job at the ER, death was usually violent, sudden, traumatic. But here, patients just seemed to slip away quietly in their sleep. No struggle, no pain, just their one moment and gone the next. Dr. Brennan has a gift, the day nurse told me. Patients always pass peacefully on his watch. He knows exactly when their time has come. I thought it was beautiful, comforting even, until I started paying closer attention to the timing. It was always between 2 and 4 a.m., always during my rounds when the hallways were empty, and always patients who had been improving just hours earlier. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been laughing with her grandson that afternoon. Mr. Kim, who'd asked me to help him call his daughter in California. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been planning her discharge for the next week. I started keeping my own records. Over 6 weeks, 13 patients died during my shifts, all between 2 and 4 a.m., all previously stable. The night I decided to investigate was a Tuesday in October. Mrs. Chun had been admitted that morning with pneumonia. Not severe, responding well to antibiotics. Her daughter had visited, brought photos of grandchildren. Mrs. Chun had been excited about going home Friday. At 1:30 a.m., I saw Dr. Brennan enter her room. He always made late rounds, so nothing seemed unusual. But instead of leaving after a few minutes like usual, he stayed. And stayed. I pretended to organize supplies at the nurse's station, watching her door. 20 minutes passed. 30. The hallway was completely silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and distant ventilator sounds. Then I heard it. Not quite talking, but a low murmur coming from Mrs. Chen's room. Dr. Brennan's voice, steady and rhythmic, like he was reciting something. Or explaining something. I crept closer to her door. It was slightly open, and through the gap I could see Dr. Brennan sitting beside Mrs. Chen's bed. She was awake, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. He was holding a pillow in his hands. "Shuh," he was saying softly. "This is how it's supposed to happen. No pain, no fear. Just sleep. Your family will remember you peacefully. They'll be grateful you didn't suffer." Mrs. Chen tried to speak, but only managed a weak whisper. "Please. I've done this for hundreds of patients," Dr. Brennan continued in that same gentle tone. "I've saved so many families from watching their loved ones deteriorate, from the agony of watching them waste away. This is mercy. This is love. I should have screamed. Should have burst through that door, called security, done something. Instead, I stood frozen in the hallway, watching through that narrow gap as Dr. Brennan slowly lowered the pillow toward Mrs. Chen's face. Her eyes found mine through the crack in the door. In that moment, she knew I was there, knew I could help her, and I just stood there, paralyzed by shock and disbelief. The pillow covered her face. Her legs moved weakly under the blankets, then gradually stopped. Dr. Brennan held it there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When he finally lifted it, Mrs. Chun was still. He arranged her arms peacefully at her sides, smoothed her hair, adjusted her gown. Then he updated her chart, noting the time of death as 2:47 a.m. Passed peacefully in her sleep, he wrote. I scrambled back to the nurse's station before he came out. When he emerged from her room, his face was serene, almost beatific. He nodded at me with that same kind smile he always wore. Mrs. Chun passed, he said quietly. Very peaceful. Please call her family in the morning. Tell them she went in her sleep, no pain. I quit the next day. Told my supervisor I was moving out of state, family emergency. I couldn't bring myself to report what I'd seen. Who would believe me? Dr. Brennan was beloved, respected. I was just a night shift nurse with no proof, except my word against a 30-year veteran. But I started researching. Hospital records, obituaries, death certificates. The pattern went back years. Hundreds of patients under Dr. Brennan's care, all dying peacefully between 2 and 4 a.m. All with families grateful for their loved ones' gentle passing. I found online forums where families shared their stories. Dr. Brennan was an angel, they wrote. Mom didn't suffer at all. Dad just slipped away peacefully, exactly how he would have wanted. We were so lucky to have such a compassionate doctor. The families never knew. They were grateful. They made donations to the hospital in Dr. Brennan's honor. That was 6 months ago. I moved across the country, got a job at a clinic doing day shifts only. I thought I could forget, move on, start over. Then last week, I got a call from Mercy General. Dr. Brennan had requested me specifically for a temporary assignment. They needed extra night shift coverage in the East Wing. He remembers what excellent care you provided, the administrator said. Says he'd love to work with you again. The pay is double your current rate. I hung up without answering, but the calls keep coming. Different numbers, different administrators, all with the same message. Dr. Brennan wants me back. Yesterday, I found something slipped under my apartment door. A newspaper clipping about Mrs. Chen's death, with a handwritten note in the margin. She asked for you at the end. Said you were watching. You should have helped. The handwriting matched Dr. Brennan's notes on all those charts. Last night, I woke up to find my front door unlocked. Nothing was missing, nothing disturbed. But there was a pillow on my couch that hadn't been there before. A hospital pillow with Mercy General embroidered in the corner. And pinned to it another note. Some patients require house calls. I found the phone in my teenage daughter's backpack 3 weeks ago. Now I wish I'd never looked at what was on it. Emma had been acting strange for months. Staying out late, lying about where she'd been, becoming secretive about her friends. Typical teenage behavior, my wife said. She'll grow out of it. But something felt different this time. Something felt wrong. The phone wasn't hers. It was an older model, cracked screen, no case. Hidden in the bottom of her bag under school papers and gum wrappers. When I powered it on, there was only one video file saved to the memory. I almost didn't watch it. Privacy, respect, trust. All the things parenting books tell you about raising teenagers. But Emma had been coming home with bruises she couldn't explain, flinching when we hugged her, crying in her sleep. As her father, I had to know what was happening. The video was 43 minutes long, filmed in what looked like a basement. Concrete walls, dim lighting, the sound of a furnace running in the background. At first, I thought it was some kind of party footage. A group of teenagers sitting in a circle on the floor, maybe playing a drinking game. Then I recognized my daughter. She was sitting cross-legged, wearing the blue sweater I'd bought her for Christmas. But her face was wrong. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, like she was drugged or in shock. The other kids looked the same. 6 of them total, all around Emma's age, all with that same vacant expression. A man's voice came from behind the camera. I couldn't see him, but his tone was calm, almost therapeutic, like a counselor leading a group session. Now remember, he was saying, what happens in our special meetings stays between us. This is your safe space. Your family. The only people who truly understand you. The kids nodded in unison. Emma nodded too. Emma, the voice continued, tell us about your week. Any problems at home? My daughter looked directly into the camera. Her voice was flat, emotionless. My dad's been asking questions. About where I go after school. He's getting suspicious. And how does that make you feel? Angry, she said. He doesn't understand me like you do, Mr. Carson. None of them do. Carson. I knew that name. Emma's drama teacher from sophomore year. She'd talked about him constantly. said he was the only adult who really listened to her. He'd left the school suddenly in January. Personal reasons, they said. The video continued. Carson asked each kid to share something, building this twisted sense of intimacy and trust. They talked about feeling misunderstood, unloved, different from everyone else. Classic manipulation tactics I recognized from psychology classes in college. But it got worse. Tonight we're going to play a new game, Carson's voice said. It's about trust, about proving how much you care for each other. He handed something to the boy sitting next to Emma. Even through the poor video quality, I could see it was a knife. Michael, I want you to make a small cut on Sarah's arm. Just enough to draw blood. Sarah, you're going to let him do it, because you trust him. Because this group is your real family. I wanted to turn it off. Wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it. But I had to know what happened to Emma. Had to know how deep this went. The kids complied without question. Michael cut Sarah's arm while she sat perfectly still, smiling. Sarah cut the boy next to her. Around and around the circle, each one cutting the next, all of them acting like this was normal, natural, beautiful. When it was Emma's turn to be cut, she didn't even flinch. She thanked the girl holding the knife. The worst part wasn't the blood or the cuts. It was how happy they all looked. How grateful. Like Carson was giving them exactly what they needed. Beautiful, Carson said from behind the camera. This is real love. Real connection. Your parents, your teachers, your friends at school, they'll never understand this. They'll try to take it away from you if they find out. They'll say we're sick, dangerous. But we know the truth, don't we? Yes, Mr. Carson, they all said together, including Emma. The video ended there. I sat in my office staring at that black screen for hours. Then I called the police. Detective Morrison listened to my story, watched the video, took notes. She was professional, thorough, sympathetic. She explained how predators like Carson work, how they isolate vulnerable kids, create artificial families, use psychological manipulation to maintain control. We'll find him, she promised, and we'll get your daughter the help she needs. They searched Carson's last known address. Empty. They interviewed Emma's friends, teachers, classmates. No one had seen or heard from Carson in months. They put out alerts, checked financial records, contacted other police departments. Emma denied everything. Said she'd never seen the phone before, never met anyone named Carson, never participated in any group activities. The bruises were from falling off her bike. The crying was from stress at school. The lies were because she wanted more independence. You're making it up, she told me, staring right into my eyes. You planted that phone to control me, to keep me from growing up. The psychiatrist we hired said it was common for victims to protect their abusers, especially in cases involving long-term psychological manipulation. It would take time, patience, therapy to break through the conditioning. But Emma refused therapy. She became more withdrawn, more hostile. She stopped eating dinner with us, stopped talking to her younger brother, started locking her bedroom door. When I tried to ground her, she climbed out her window. When I took her phone, she found other ways to communicate. The detective called me last week. They'd found Carson. He was dead. Overdose in a motel room in Nevada, body badly decomposed. Coroner estimated he'd been dead for at least 6 months. Maybe longer. I'm sorry, Detective Morrison said. I know you wanted closure, but at least your daughter is safe now. But Emma isn't safe. She's gotten worse since Carson's death, not better. More secretive, more defiant, more distant. Sometimes I catch her whispering to herself, having conversations with someone who isn't there. Yesterday, I found another phone hidden in her room. Newer model this time, password protected. When she came home from school, I confronted her about it. She smiled at me, the same grateful, empty smile I'd seen in that video. You wouldn't understand, Dad, she said. Mr. Carson taught us that family isn't about blood. It's about understanding, about connection. Emma, Carson is dead. He's been dead for months. Her smile never wavered. That's what makes it beautiful. Real love doesn't die. Real family is forever. That night, I heard voices coming from her room. Multiple voices, having a conversation. But when I pressed my ear to the door, I realized it was just Emma, speaking in different tones, different accents, playing all the parts. Playing all the members of her family. Her real family. The family that Carson taught her to create in her mind. This morning, I found a note on my desk written in Emma's handwriting. The group is meeting tonight. We have room for one more member. We think you'd fit in perfectly. It's getting dark outside. Emma left for school this morning, but never came home. I've been calling her friends, her teachers, anyone who might know where she is. But deep down, I know where she's gone. She's gone to the basement. The same basement from the video. And she's waiting for me to join her family meeting. I moved into the ground floor apartment on Maple Street because the rent was cheap and I needed somewhere quiet to finish my thesis. The landlord mentioned there was a tenant upstairs, an elderly woman named Mrs. Kowalski, but assured me she was very quiet, perfect for someone who needed to concentrate. For the first month, he was right. I barely knew anyone lived above me. Occasional footsteps, the muffled sound of a television, normal apartment noises. I settled into a routine. Coffee at 6 a.m., writing until noon, teaching assistant work in the afternoons, more writing until late evening. Then the pattern started. Every night at exactly 11:47 p.m., I'd hear Mrs. Kowalski's footsteps above my bedroom. Not random walking around, but a deliberate pattern. 12 steps from what sounded like her front door to her kitchen. A pause. Then back again. 12 steps back. At first I thought she was just getting a late night snack or glass of water. Old people often have trouble sleeping. But it happened every single night, always at 11:47, always the same pattern. 12 steps out, pause, 12 steps back. After 2 weeks, I started paying closer attention. The footsteps were too heavy for an elderly woman, too deliberate, and there was something else. During the pause between the walking, I could hear a faint scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. I mentioned it to my neighbor across the hall, Mr. Peterson. He'd lived in the building for 5 years. Mrs. Kowalski? He looked confused. There's no Mrs. Kowalski upstairs. That apartment's been empty for months. Landlord's been trying to rent it, but people keep backing out after viewing it. I showed him my lease. Clear as day. Tenant acknowledges noise from upstairs resident Mrs. Kowalski. Mr. Peterson shook his head. That's weird, man. I've never seen anyone go in or out of that apartment. And I'm home most evenings. That night, I stayed awake waiting for 11:47. Right on schedule, the footsteps started. 12 heavy steps, pause, scraping sound, 12 steps back. I put on shoes and quietly went upstairs to the second floor landing. The apartment door was painted green, number 2B. No nameplate. I pressed my ear against the wood and listened. The footsteps had stopped, but I could hear something else now. A low humming, like someone working contentedly on a task. I knocked softly. Hello? Mrs. Kowalski. The humming stopped immediately. Complete silence. I knocked again. I'm sorry to bother you. I live downstairs. I just wanted to introduce myself. Nothing. But I could feel someone standing just on the other side of the door. The kind of presence you sense when someone is close, listening, waiting. I went back to my apartment, but I couldn't focus on writing anymore. Instead, I started researching the building's history online. Property records, newspaper archives, anything I could find. The building was constructed in 1962. Pretty standard rental history until 1998, when a woman named Helen Kowalski rented apartment 2B. She lived there alone for 15 years until 2013, when neighbors complained about a smell coming from her unit. The article I found was brief. Elderly woman found dead in apartment. Helen Kowalski, 73, discovered after neighbors reported odor. Cause of death listed as natural causes, though the body had been decomposed for an estimated 3 weeks before discovery. But here's what made my blood run cold. The article mentioned that neighbors had continued to hear footsteps from her apartment for several days after she died. Police dismissed it as settling sounds from the vacant unit above. There was no vacant unit above 2B. Mrs. Kowalski lived on the top floor. I called the landlord the next morning. He sounded nervous when I brought up Mrs. Kowalski. Look, he said finally, I probably should have mentioned this before you signed the lease. The previous tenant in 2B did die in the apartment. Natural causes, nothing suspicious. But some people get spooked by that kind of thing. That's why I usually mention there's still a tenant upstairs. Keeps people from getting paranoid about noises. But I hear someone walking around up there every night. Old building, he said quickly. Pipes, settling, could be anything. I'll send someone to check it out if you want. He never sent anyone. The footsteps continued every night. Always 11:47, always the same pattern. But I started noticing other details. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like furniture being moved during the day. Water running through the pipes. Once, I could swear I smelled cooking food coming through my ceiling vent. I decided to investigate further. The building had a maintenance entrance to the basement that accessed the utilities for all units. If I could get to the basement, maybe I could figure out what was happening upstairs. The basement was exactly what you'd expect in an old apartment building. Concrete walls, exposed pipes, furnace, water heater. But in the corner, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A newer section of concrete flooring, maybe 3 feet by 6 feet, that didn't match the rest. The concrete was slightly raised, like something had been buried underneath and the ground had settled unevenly. Around the edges, I could see where someone had tried to blend the new concrete with the old, but hadn't quite managed to match the color. I went back upstairs and called Detective Morrison, the same officer who had helped me with a break-in at my previous apartment. I told her about the footsteps, the research I'd done, the concrete in the basement. She listened patiently, then explained that people often imagine things after learning about deaths in their building. Suggested I might want to consider moving if it was affecting my sleep and work. But she agreed to do a welfare check on apartment 2B. I watched from my window as she knocked on the door upstairs. No answer. She knocked again, identified herself as police. Still nothing. She spoke briefly with the landlord, who had arrived with keys, then they both went inside. They were up there for maybe 10 minutes. When they came down, Detective Morrison looked confused. The apartment is completely empty, she told me. No furniture, no personal belongings, nothing. Hasn't been cleaned recently either. Dust everywhere, like no one's been inside for months. That night, I decided to record the footsteps. Set up my phone with a voice recording app and waited for 11:47. The footsteps came right on schedule. 12 steps out, pause, scraping sound, 12 steps back. Crystal clear on the recording. But when I played it back, there was nothing but silence. I tried again the next night with a different phone. Same result. The footsteps were clear as day while they were happening, but completely absent from any recording. I started losing sleep, falling behind on my thesis, calling in sick to my teaching assistant job. The stress was affecting everything. My advisor suggested I take a semester off, get some rest, maybe see a counselor. But I knew what I was hearing, and I knew someone was in that apartment, whether they showed up on recordings or not. Last week, I made a decision. I was going to confront whatever was upstairs, recording or no recording, empty apartment or not. At 11:47, I positioned myself on the second floor landing and waited. The footsteps started right on schedule, but this time, I could hear them clearly through the door. Not coming from inside the apartment, coming from the hallway where I was standing. The footsteps were right beside me. 12 heavy steps down the hallway toward the stairs. I couldn't see anyone, couldn't feel anyone, but the sound was unmistakable. Something walking right past me. I followed the sound downstairs, through my apartment, to my bedroom. The footsteps stopped directly above my bed. Then came the pause and the scraping sound. It wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from inside my walls. I called the landlord and demanded he break open that new concrete section in the basement. Told him I'd call the police, the health department, anyone who would listen if he didn't. He came over that afternoon with a sledgehammer and crowbar, muttering about crazy tenants and lawsuits. It took him 20 minutes to break through the concrete. Helen Kowalski was underneath. What was left of her, still wearing the blue dress described in her obituary. But she'd never been buried in any cemetery. The smell that hit us was indescribable. Even after all these years, even mummified by the dry basement air, the odor was overwhelming. The landlord vomited immediately. Called the police, an ambulance, a cleanup crew. Kept asking how this was possible, how no one had known, how he could have been renting apartments above a hidden grave for over a decade. But I wasn't listening to him anymore. I was staring at Helen Kowalski's remains, at the position of her body in that makeshift grave. Her arms were stretched above her head, fingers clawed, like she'd been trying to dig her way out. And her legs were positioned like she'd been walking, even in death. 12 steps from my front door to my bedroom, right above where they'd buried her. The police investigation revealed that Helen Kowalski had never actually died of natural causes. The previous landlord had killed her when she threatened to report him for illegal rent practices. He'd buried her in the basement and told everyone she'd moved away. When he sold the building, he'd poured new concrete to hide the grave. Detective Morrison said the new landlord genuinely had no idea. The previous owner had forged death certificates, staged the whole thing to look like a natural death and burial. She was trying to tell you where to find her, the detective said. Walking the same path every night, leading you from the apartment where she was killed to the place where she was buried. I moved out the next day. The building was condemned, turned into a crime scene. The case made national news. The previous landlord was found and arrested. But here's what I never told the detective, what I never told anyone. That last night, when I followed the footsteps to my bedroom, when I realized they were coming from inside the walls, I heard something else. A voice, whispered, grateful, coming from somewhere below my feet. "Thank you," it said. "Thank you for listening." I need to write this down while it's still fresh in my memory. The police said they might need a detailed account of everything that happened tonight at the Morrison house. They keep asking if I'm sure about what I saw, if I might have been mistaken, if maybe I was just scared and imagining things. I wasn't imagining anything. I've been babysitting for 3 years, ever since I turned 16. Good families, normal kids, easy money for college savings. The Morrisons seemed perfect when they called last week. Professional couple, beautiful house in Westfield Heights, twin boys age 7. They offered twice my usual rate for a Saturday night. The boys are very well behaved, Mrs. Morrison explained over the phone. They'll be asleep by 8:30. You'll barely need to do anything except make sure they stay in bed. When I arrived at 6 p.m., the house was immaculate. Hardwood floors, expensive furniture, family photos everywhere showing the Morrisons with their adorable identical twin sons, Jake and Danny. Both boys had bright blonde hair and matching gap-toothed smiles. Mr. Morrison answered the door. Tall, well-dressed, friendly but nervous. He kept checking his watch and glancing upstairs. "The boys are having dinner," he said, leading me to the kitchen. "They know you're coming. We've told them to be on their best behavior." Mrs. Morrison was setting 2 plates on the kitchen table. She was elegant, perfectly made up, but something felt off about her smile. Too wide, too forced, like she was trying very hard to appear normal. The boys were already seated at the table. Jake and Danny, exactly as described. Blonde hair, gap-toothed grins, wearing matching pajamas. They waved at me politely when their parents introduced us. "Hi, Miss Sarah," they said in unison. "Thank you for watching us tonight. Perfect children. Almost too perfect." The Morrisons gave me the standard instructions. Bedtime at 8:30, no television after 9, our phone numbers on the refrigerator, we'll be back by midnight. They seemed eager to leave, kept rushing through the details. "One more thing," Mrs. Morrison said as they headed for the door. "The boys sometimes play games at bedtime. Pretend games. If they say anything strange, just ignore it. They have very active imaginations." I watched from the window as they drove away, then went back to the kitchen. Jake and Danny had finished eating and were clearing their plates without being asked. "Model children, can we show you our room?" Jake asked. "We want to show you our toys," Danny added. They led me upstairs to a bedroom that looked like a showcase. Twin beds with matching blue comforters, shelves full of books and educational toys, not a single thing out of place. Everything perfectly organized, perfectly clean. "This is where we sleep," Jake said, sitting on one bed. "We always sleep very well," Danny said, sitting on the other. I helped them brush their teeth and get settled. They climbed into their respective beds without any fuss, pulled their covers up to their chins, and lay perfectly still. "Good night, Miss Sarah," they said together. "Sweet dreams, boys." I turned off the light and went downstairs to do homework. The house was quiet, peaceful. Easy money, just like Mrs. Morrison had promised. At 10:30, I heard movement upstairs. Footsteps in the hallway, whispering voices. I went to check on them. The boys' bedroom was empty. Both beds were still neatly made, covers pulled up exactly as I'd left them. But Jake and Danny were nowhere to be seen. "Boys," I called softly. "Jake? Danny?" I heard giggling coming from the parents' bedroom at the end of the hall. I found them there, standing side by side at the foot of their parents' bed, still in their matching pajamas. "We're playing the quiet game," Jake whispered. "We have to be very quiet," Danny added. "Okay, but you need to go back to your own room. Your parents said no playing after bedtime." They looked at each other, then back at me. That same too wide smile I'd seen on their mother's face. "We can't go back," Jake said. "Why not?" "Because we're not supposed to be awake," Danny explained, like this made perfect sense. I was getting annoyed. Perfect children or not, they were breaking the rules. "Come on, guys. Back to bed. Now. But when I turned to escort them to their room, they were gone. The bedroom was empty. I looked under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. No sign of them anywhere. I went back to their room. Both boys were in their beds, covers pulled up, eyes closed, breathing steadily like they'd been asleep for hours. I stood in the doorway for 5 minutes, watching them. They didn't move, didn't stir, didn't even seem to be breathing deeply enough for real sleep. They were too still, too perfect. I went back downstairs and tried to focus on homework, but I couldn't concentrate. Something was wrong with this house, with this family, with those boys. At 11:15, I heard the footsteps again. This time I went upstairs immediately. Jake and Danny were in the kitchen, standing in front of the open refrigerator. The light cast eerie shadows on their faces. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Getting a snack," Jake said without turning around. "We're hungry," Danny added. "You already ate dinner, and you're supposed to be in bed." They turned to face me, and that's when I saw what they were holding. Not food from the refrigerator. Photographs. Dozens of family photos, the same ones I'd seen displayed throughout the house. "Look," Jake said, holding up a picture. "This is us at the beach last summer." I looked at the photo. It showed the Morrison family at the beach. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison with their arms around 2 blonde boys. But something was wrong with the image. The boys in the photo looked different somehow. Older maybe. Or maybe just more real than the children standing in front of me. "We like looking at pictures," Danny said. "It helps us remember." "Remember what?" They exchanged that look again. That strange, adult understanding that didn't belong on 7-year-old faces. "Remember how to be Jake and Danny," Jake said. My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes we forget," Danny explained patiently. "The pictures help us remember how to act like them." I snatched the photographs away from them. "Go to bed. Right now. I'm calling your parents." But when I looked up from the photos, the kitchen was empty again. I ran upstairs. Jake and Danny were back in their beds, perfectly positioned, fake sleeping again. This time I didn't leave. I stood in their doorway and watched, waiting for them to break character. After 20 minutes, Jake opened his eyes and looked directly at me. "You're not supposed to watch us," he said in a voice too calm for a child. "I'm the babysitter. I'm supposed to watch you." "Not when we're changing back," Danny said, his eyes still closed. "Changing back into what?" Jake sat up in bed. In the dim light from the hallway, his face looked different. The features were the same, but something about the expression was wrong. Too knowing, too calculating. "We're not really Jake and Danny," he said matter-of-factly. "Then who are you?" "We don't remember our real names," Danny said, sitting up as well. "We've been Jake and Danny for so long now." I felt sick to my stomach. "Where are the real Jake and Danny?" They pointed to the floor beneath their beds. "They're sleeping," Jake said. "They've been sleeping for a long time," Danny added. I should have run then. Should have called the police immediately. Instead, I found myself kneeling down and looking under Jake's bed. There was a loose floorboard. When I pried it up, I found a small, shallow space underneath. Just big enough for a child. The smell that came up was horrible. Sweet and sick and wrong. "They got sick," Jake explained, watching me with those 2 adult eyes. "Their parents were very sad. So we came to help." "We look just like them," Danny said proudly. "Their parents are much happier now." "We're very good at being Jake and Danny," Jake added. "We studied the pictures for a long time before their parents came back." I replaced the floorboard and stood up slowly, my hands shaking. "What happened to your real bodies?" "We don't have real bodies anymore," Danny said. "We borrow these ones." "When Jake and Danny got too sick to use them, we moved in," Jake explained. "Their parents never noticed the difference." I backed toward the door. "I'm calling the police." "The police can't help," Jake said sadly. "They'll just see Jake and Danny Morrison. Perfect children with perfect parents and a perfect family." "No one will believe you," Danny added. "And if you cause trouble, we'll have to find new bodies to borrow." Jake smiled that horrible, too wide smile. "Maybe yours." I ran downstairs and grabbed my phone, dialed 911 with trembling fingers. But before the operator could answer, I heard the front door open. "We're home," Mrs. Morrison called cheerfully. Mr. Morrison came into the living room, where I was standing with the phone. "How were the boys? Any trouble?" I looked at him, at his normal, concerned parent expression, and realized that Jake and Danny were right. What could I possibly tell him? That his children were dead and something else was wearing their bodies? They were perfect, I heard myself say. Angels. Mrs. Morrison beamed. They really are special boys. We're so lucky. She paid me double what we'd agreed on. Told me they'd love to have me babysit again anytime. Mr. Morrison drove me home, chatting about how well-behaved Jake and Danny had been lately, how much happier they seemed, how grateful he and his wife were to have such wonderful children. I smiled and nodded and acted normal while inside I was screaming. That was 6 hours ago. I've been sitting at my desk since then, trying to write this all down, trying to make sense of what I saw. Part of me wants to believe I imagined it all. Stress, too much coffee, and overactive imagination. But I keep thinking about those photographs, the things pretending to be Jake and Danny were studying. How they said the pictures helped them remember how to act. And I keep thinking about what they said about borrowing bodies when the old ones got too sick to use. Tomorrow I'm going to research the Morrison family. Find out when Jake and Danny got sick, what happened to them, whether there were any death certificates filed. I'm going to find proof of what I saw. Because those things upstairs aren't children. They're something else entirely, something that's learned to mimic human behavior well enough to fool loving parents who desperately want their sons back. And they're getting better at it every day. The worst part is knowing that somewhere in Westfield Heights, there are other families. Other parents who think their children recovered from illnesses, when really something else just moved into their bodies. Other babysitters who might not be as lucky as I was tonight. Other children who might not stay sleeping under the floorboards. I've been a Child Protective Services worker for 8 years. I've seen abuse, neglect, situations that would make most people quit after a week. But nothing prepared me for the Hartley case. Nothing prepared me for what I found in that house on Elm Street. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Anonymous tip about possible child neglect. 4-year-old girl, rarely seen outside, parents acting strangely when neighbors tried to talk to them. Standard welfare check, the kind I do 3 times a week. The Hartleys lived in a modest 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Well-maintained lawn, fresh paint, nothing that screamed dysfunction from the outside. But I've learned that the worst cases often look normal from the street. Mr. Hartley answered the door. Mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing a button-down shirt like he was heading to an office job. He seemed nervous when I introduced myself and showed my credentials. There must be some mistake, he said. Our daughter Emma is perfectly fine. We're good parents. I'm sure you are, Mr. Hartley. This is just a routine check. Someone called in a concern, and we're required to follow up. May I come in? He hesitated, glanced back into the house, then reluctantly stepped aside. My wife is upstairs with Emma. She's been sick lately. Nothing serious, just a cold. The house was spotless, almost obsessively clean. No toys visible, no signs that a 4-year-old lived there. The living room looked like a furniture showroom, everything perfectly placed and dust-free. How long has Emma been sick? I asked, taking notes. About 2 weeks. She's been mostly staying in her room, resting. We don't want her infecting the neighbors' children. Mrs. Hartley came downstairs. Blonde, well-dressed, with that same nervous energy as her husband. She smiled too brightly when she saw me. Oh, you must be from the school district, she said. We've been meaning to call about Emma's enrollment. I'm from Child Protective Services, Mrs. Hartley. I'd like to see Emma, if that's possible. Her smile faltered for just a moment. She's sleeping right now. The medicine makes her drowsy. I understand, but I do need to see her as part of my assessment. The Hartleys exchanged a look. The same kind of quick, meaningful glance I'd seen in dozens of homes where parents were hiding something. Of course, Mr. Hartley said finally. She's upstairs. Emma's room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a hallway lined with family photos. But as I looked closer at the pictures, something felt off. They showed the Hartleys in various locations, always smiling, always well-dressed. But in every photo, there was an empty space between them, like someone had been carefully cut out of each image. Here she is, Mrs. Hartley whispered, opening the bedroom door. The room was dark, curtains drawn, only a small nightlight providing illumination. In the center was a child-sized bed with pink sheets and a matching comforter. A small figure lay under the covers, completely still. Emma, sweetheart, Mrs. Hartley said softly. There's someone here to see you. The figure in the bed didn't move. Didn't respond at all. She's a heavy sleeper, Mr. Hartley explained. The medicine really knocks her out. I stepped closer to the bed. Even in the dim light, I could see the child's face on the pillow. Pale, peaceful, eyes closed. Blonde hair spread around her head like a halo. But something was wrong. The face was too pale, too perfect. And there was a strange, sweet smell in the room. Chemical and floral at the same time. How long has she been sleeping? I asked. She took her medicine about an hour ago, Mrs. Hartley said. She'll probably sleep for another few hours. I reached toward the bed to check Emma's breathing. Mrs. Hartley quickly grabbed my arm. Please don't wake her, she said urgently. She gets so cranky when she's disturbed. And with her being sick, I just want to make sure she's breathing normally. Of course she's breathing normally, Mr. Hartley said, his voice getting sharper. She's our daughter. We know how to take care of her. But I was already leaning over the bed, looking closely at Emma's face. Her skin had a waxy, artificial quality. Her lips were slightly blue, and her chest wasn't rising and falling with breath. I pulled back the covers. Emma was wearing a white dress, hands folded peacefully across her chest. Her skin was cold to the touch, rigid. She had been dead for days, maybe weeks. Mr. and Mrs. Hartley, I said as calmly as I could manage, I need you to step out of the room with me right now. Is something wrong? Mrs. Hartley asked, but her voice had changed. Less concerned parent, more cornered animal. We need to call an ambulance. And the police. No, Mr. Hartley said firmly. Emma is fine. She's just sleeping. She's been sleeping very peacefully. I backed toward the door, reaching for my phone. Mrs. Hartley moved to block my path. She was so sick, she said, tears starting to stream down her face. The fever wouldn't break. We tried everything, but she just got worse and worse. When did Emma die? I asked. She didn't die, Mr. Hartley insisted. Look at her. She's right there. She's sleeping. We couldn't let them take her away, Mrs. Hartley continued, as if her husband hadn't spoken. They would have buried her somewhere cold and dark. Here she's safe. Here she's home. I managed to get past them and into the hallway, dialing 911 as I ran downstairs. The Hartleys followed, both talking at once, trying to explain that Emma was just sick, just sleeping, that I was overreacting. The police and paramedics arrived within 10 minutes. While the paramedics confirmed what I already knew, that Emma had been deceased for at least 2 weeks, the officers questioned the Hartleys. The story came out in pieces. Emma had contracted meningitis 3 weeks earlier. Instead of taking her to a hospital, the Hartleys had tried to treat her at home with over-the-counter medications and home remedies. By the time they realized how serious her condition was, it was too late. Rather than face the consequences of medical neglect, they had decided to keep her body in the house. They'd been preserving her with formaldehyde stolen from Mr. Hartley's job at a funeral home, dressing her each day, talking to her, pretending she was just sleeping. We read her bedtime stories every night, Mrs. Hartley told the detective through her tears. We sing her favorite songs. She loves it when we sing to her. She's been so good, Mr. Hartley added. So quiet and well-behaved. The perfect daughter. The neighbors told police they'd been concerned for weeks. They'd heard the Hartleys talking to someone upstairs, heard what sounded like a child's voice responding. But when they looked closely, they realized it was just the parents doing both voices, having entire conversations with their dead daughter. The medical examiner determined that Emma could have been saved if she'd received proper medical treatment. The Hartleys were charged with child endangerment, failure to report a death, and improper disposal of human remains. But here's what haunts me most about the case. During the investigation, police found Emma's diary. She'd been writing in it right up until she got sick. The last entry was dated 3 days before her death. Mommy and Daddy are acting weird, she'd written in her careful 4-year-old handwriting. They keep giving me medicine that tastes yucky and makes me sleepy. I told them I feel worse, but they said the medicine will make me better. I just want to go outside and play, but they won't let me. I think they forgot how to take care of me. That little girl knew she was dying. Knew her parents weren't helping her the way they should. And in her final days, she was more worried about them than about herself. The Hartleys were sentenced to 15 years each. During the trial, they maintained that they were loving parents who had done everything they could for their daughter. Mrs. Hartley testified that keeping Emma's body was an act of love, that they couldn't bear to be separated from her. I've seen a lot of cases where parents failed their children, but I'd never seen anything like the Hartleys' complete break from reality. Their absolute refusal to accept that their daughter was gone. The house on Elm Street has been empty since the arrest. Sometimes I drive by it on my way to other calls. The neighbors say they still hear voices from inside sometimes. Probably just the wind or kids playing pranks. But I know better. I know that some grief is so powerful, so consuming, that it creates its own reality. I know that love can become so twisted that it destroys the very thing it's trying to protect. And I know that somewhere in that empty house, in that little girl's bedroom, the echo of those bedtime stories and lullabies still lingers. Stories and songs that should have been sung to a living child, not whispered to a corpse. Stories that Emma Hartley will never get to hear again. I picked up my last passenger 3 nights ago. I keep telling myself it was my last anyway, that I'm done driving for Uber, done picking up strangers in the middle of the night, done pretending everything is normal when it's not. But I can't stop thinking about her, about what she said, about what I saw in my rearview mirror. It was 2:43 a.m. on a Thursday when I got the ping. Pick up at 12:47, Oakwood Drive, drop off at the airport. The ride would take 40 minutes through empty suburban streets and pay decent money. Late-night airport runs were my specialty. Drunk businessmen, early flights, people desperate enough to pay surge pricing. The pickup address was in Willowbrook Heights, one of those expensive neighborhoods where all the houses look identical. Big lawns, circular driveways, security systems on every door. I'd driven there before, usually picking up cheating husbands or trophy wives sneaking out for late-night affairs. The house was dark except for a single light in an upstairs window. I parked in the driveway and sent the standard "I'm here" text. Within 30 seconds, the front door opened. She was maybe 25, wearing jeans and an oversized sweatshirt. Short brown hair, no makeup, carrying a small backpack. She moved quickly but carefully, like someone trying not to make noise. The kind of careful you see in people who are running from something. "Michael?" she asked, checking my license plate before getting in. "That's me. Airport. Terminal B. And please, can we just go? Fast as possible." She slid into the back seat and immediately ducked down, below the window line. I pulled out of the driveway and started toward the highway. "Everything okay back there?" "Just drive," she said. "Please. I've been doing this for 3 years. You learn to read people, learn when to ask questions, and when to keep quiet." She was scared. Not drunk scared or late for a flight scared. Real scared. The kind that makes you look over your shoulder every few seconds. 5 minutes into the ride, she sat up and looked out the back window. "Is anyone following us?" I checked my mirrors. Empty road behind us, nothing but streetlights and closed businesses. Nope. Just us. She exhaled slowly. "Okay. Good. You in some kind of trouble?" She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My husband doesn't know I'm leaving. He can't know. I've heard that story before. Domestic violence, controlling relationships, women escaping in the middle of the night with whatever they could carry. It's more common than people think. You got somewhere safe to go?" "My sister in Portland. She's expecting me." "Good. That's good." We drove in silence for another 10 minutes. I kept checking the mirrors, making sure no one was following. She seemed to relax a little, stopped ducking every time headlights appeared behind us. Then she started talking. "His name is David. We've been married 2 years. At first he was perfect. Charming, attentive, generous. Everything I thought I wanted. Classic abuser pattern. Love bombing, isolation, gradual escalation of control. When did things change? About 6 months ago. He started asking where I was going, who I was talking to. Had to approve my clothes, my friends, my job. Said he was just worried about me, just wanted to protect me. They always say that. Then last month, he installed cameras in the house. Said it was for security. But I realized he was watching me even when he wasn't home. Monitoring everything I did. I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the side window, lost in memory. 2 weeks ago, I found his computer open. He had files on it. Photos, videos, documents. All about me, but also about other women. Dozens of them. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. What kind of files? Pictures of women sleeping. In their beds, in their houses. Women who had no idea they were being photographed. Her voice started shaking. And police reports. Missing person reports. For women who looked just like me. The car suddenly felt very cold. I confronted him about it. Asked him what those files were. Why he had photos of strange women. He got so angry. Said I was paranoid, jealous, that I was imagining things. But you weren't. No. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. He would leave the house at night, sometimes for hours. Always had explanations. Work emergency, friend needed help, family obligation. But when I called his work, his friends, his family, no one knew what I was talking about. We were approaching the highway now, almost halfway to the airport. 3 nights ago, he came home at 4 a.m. with mud on his shoes and scratches on his hands. Said he'd been helping a co-worker move furniture. But it was a Tuesday night. Who moves furniture at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday? What did you do? I followed him the next night. Stayed far enough back that he wouldn't see me. He drove to the same neighborhood where he'd been taking those photos. Parked outside a house where a young woman lived alone. I could see her hands shaking in the mirror. I watched him break into her house. Just slipped right in through a back door like he'd done it 100 times before. I sat in my car for 2 hours, too scared to call the police, too scared to leave. Did he hurt her? I don't know. He came out carrying something. A bag maybe. Put it in his trunk and drove home. When I got there, he was already in bed, pretending to sleep. Jesus. I tried to convince myself I'd misunderstood what I saw. Maybe he was helping her with something. Maybe she was a friend I didn't know about. But then I found the newspaper article. What article? Woman found dead in her home. 26 years old, lived alone, no signs of forced entry. Police said it looked like natural causes, but they were investigating. She took a shaky breath. It was her house. The same house I'd watched him break into. We merged onto the highway. The airport was 20 minutes away. That's when I started planning to leave. Took me 3 days to get everything ready. Had to be careful, had to act normal. Pretend I didn't know what he was. You did the right thing. Did I? Because here's what I can't stop thinking about. If I'm right about what he's doing, then leaving doesn't stop him. It just means he'll find someone else. Someone who looks like me. I checked the mirrors again. Still clear. You have evidence. The files on his computer, the timing of the break-in, the newspaper article. The police will investigate. Will they? He's smart. Careful. He's been doing this for who knows how long, and no one's ever caught him. Those missing women, those deaths ruled natural causes. What if they weren't natural at all? The airport exit was coming up. Almost there. What if my husband is a serial killer, and I'm the only one who knows? I took the exit and headed toward Terminal B. She was sitting up now, looking out the front window at the airport lights. You're doing the right thing, I said again. Get somewhere safe, then call the police. Tell them everything. Yeah, maybe. I pulled up to the departure curb. She handed me cash, twice what the fare should have been. Thank you, she said. For listening. For believing me. Good luck. She got out, grabbed her backpack, and disappeared into the terminal. I sat there for a few minutes, thinking about her story, wondering if I should have done more than just listen. Then I drove home and tried to forget about it, but I couldn't forget. Her story kept replaying in my head. The photos, the missing women, the break-in, the suspicious death. What if she was right? What if David really was killing people? Yesterday, I looked up the newspaper article she'd mentioned. Found it online. 26-year-old Sarah Martinez, found dead in her home on Maple Street. No signs of struggle, no obvious cause of death, police investigating but treating it as natural causes pending autopsy results. Then I started looking for other similar cases. Young women living alone, found dead with no clear cause. Over the past 2 years, I found 7 articles. 7 women who could have been her sister. All ruled natural causes or undetermined. All in neighborhoods where expensive houses overlook modest apartment complexes. All within 20 miles of Willowbrook Heights. This morning, I called the police tip line. Told them about my passenger, about her husband David, about the files she'd found. The officer took my information, said they'd look into it. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not enough. That David is still out there, still hunting. That my passenger escaped, but someone else won't be so lucky. Because here's what I realized as I was researching those deaths. The pickup address she gave me, 1247 Oakwood Drive. I drove past it today in daylight. The house is empty. Has been for sale for 6 months. She never lived there. Never had a husband named David. Never found any files or followed anyone to break into houses. But 7 women are still dead. And someone killed them. Someone who knows I have information about those deaths now. Someone who might decide I know too much. Last night, I thought I saw the same car behind me during 3 different rides. Tonight, there's been a man sitting in a parked car across from my apartment for the past 2 hours. I think I was never supposed to forget that ride. I think I was supposed to investigate those deaths, supposed to call the police, supposed to start asking questions. I think my passenger wasn't running from a killer. I think she was working for one. The new neighbors. I need to tell someone what happened before they find me. Before they realize I know the truth about the family that moved in next door. The police won't believe me, but maybe if I write it all down, someone will understand why I had to run. The Hendersons moved into the house at 412 Pine Street 3 months ago. Perfect suburban family. Dad in his 40s, mom in her 30s, 2 kids around 10 and 12. They introduced themselves at the neighborhood barbecue, brought homemade cookies, complimented everyone's gardens. Model neighbors. But something felt off from the beginning. Not anything obvious. Just small things that didn't quite add up. Like how they never seemed to receive mail. I work from home, spend most days at my kitchen window that overlooks the street. Mail truck comes at 2 p.m. every day, stops at every house on the block. Except theirs. Never once in 3 months. Or how their garbage cans were always empty on pickup day. Every other house puts out bags, recycling, yard waste. The Hendersons put out pristine cans that the garbage truck barely touched. And the groceries. I'd see Mrs. Henderson come back from shopping with bags and bags of food. Enough to feed a family of 6 for weeks. But she went shopping every other day. The kids were weird too. They played in the backyard sometimes, but never made noise. No laughing, no shouting, no normal kid sounds. Just quiet, organized games that ended exactly at dinner time. My wife said I was being paranoid. New neighbors, different routines, nothing suspicious about it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the Hendersons were performing normalcy rather than living it. Then I started noticing the smell. It happened on hot days when the wind blew just right. Something sweet and chemical coming from their house. Not cooking food or cleaning products. Something organic that had gone wrong. I mentioned it to Bob across the street. He'd smelled it too, but figured it was landscaping fertilizer, or maybe a septic problem. Normal explanations for normal people. But normal people don't replace their air conditioning unit every 2 weeks. I watched the HVAC trucks come and go from the Henderson house like clockwork. Different companies, always emergency calls, always replacing the entire unit. When I asked Mr. Henderson about it at the mailbox, he laughed it off. These older houses, he said, always something breaking down. We just want to keep the family comfortable. Except their house wasn't old. It was built 5 years ago, same model as mine. My AC unit has never needed repair. Last week, I decided to investigate. Waited until the Henderson family left in their minivan, then walked over to their backyard. Just being neighborly, I told myself. Maybe offer to help with their apparent AC problems. Their trash cans were sitting by the back door, waiting for pickup. I lifted the lid on one, just curious about what a family that ordered groceries constantly might throw away. The smell hit me immediately. That same sweet, chemical odor, but concentrated. Like opening an oven full of rotting meat. Inside the can were dozens of takeout containers. Chinese food, pizza boxes, burger wrappers. All empty, all clean, like they'd been rinsed out before disposal. But underneath, wrapped in layers of plastic bags, were the remains of actual meals. Home-cooked food. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables. All of it spoiled, covered in mold, like it had been sitting in the heat for weeks. They were throwing away perfectly good homemade meals and keeping empty takeout containers. That night, I positioned myself at my upstairs window with binoculars. The Henderson house was lit up, warm and cozy looking. I could see the family moving around inside, having what looked like a normal evening. Mr. Henderson reading a newspaper. Mrs. Henderson doing dishes. The kids watching television. But something was wrong with the scene. Their movements were too rehearsed, too coordinated. Like actors hitting their marks on a stage. At 9 p.m. sharp, all the lights went out. Not gradually, room by room like a normal family going to bed. All at once, like someone threw a master switch. I kept watching. Around midnight, I saw a faint light in their basement. Then another light and another. Like someone was moving through the lower level of the house with a flashlight. The next morning, there was a different HVAC truck in their driveway. I called the company listed on the truck and asked about the service call. The dispatcher was confused. No record of any service call to Pine Street. No record of anyone by the name Henderson as a customer. But I had watched the technicians go into the house. Watch them carry equipment to the basement. Watch them leave 2 hours later. That afternoon, I saw Mrs. Henderson outside watering plants that had been dead for weeks. I couldn't take it anymore. I called the police and asked for a welfare check. Told them I was concerned about my neighbors, that their behavior seemed erratic, that there might be something wrong in the house. Officer Martinez came by that evening. I watched from my window as he knocked on the Henderson door. Mr. Henderson answered. They talked for maybe 5 minutes, then the officer left. He stopped by my house afterward. I spoke with your neighbor, he said. Mr. Henderson explained that they've been having some family issues. His mother-in-law is staying with them temporarily. She's been quite ill. That's why they've needed so many AC repairs, trying to keep her comfortable. Did you see the mother-in-law? She's resting. Mr. Henderson didn't want to disturb her, but he appreciated your concern and promised to keep the noise down. There had never been any noise. That night, I heard digging coming from their backyard. Not landscaping kind of digging. Frantic, urgent digging like someone was trying to bury something deep. I crept to my back fence and peered over. Mr. Henderson was in the yard with a shovel, working by flashlight. He dug a hole about 6 feet long and 3 feet deep. As I watched, he went back to the house and returned carrying something wrapped in sheets. Something roughly the size and shape of a person. He placed it carefully in the hole and began filling it with dirt. I should have called the police then. Should have taken photos, gathered evidence, done something official and legal and smart. Instead, I waited until the next day when the Henderson family left in their minivan, then climbed over the fence. The freshly dug area was easy to find. Loose soil, patchy grass hastily replanted over the top. I brought a shovel from my own shed and started digging. 3 feet down, I hit something soft wrapped in a floral bedsheet. Inside was an elderly woman. Gray hair, floral nightgown, wearing a hospital bracelet with the name Eleanor Henderson. Mr. Henderson's mother-in-law, I assumed. The one who had supposedly been staying with them. She looked like she had died peacefully in her sleep. No signs of violence, no obvious injuries. But her skin had a waxy, artificial quality, like she had been preserved somehow. And she had been dead for a long time. Weeks, maybe months. Long before the Henderson family had moved to Pine Street. I reburied her and climbed back over the fence, my mind racing. The Hendersons had been carrying a corpse with them. Living with it, taking care of it, pretending it was alive. But why? What kind of people travel with dead relatives and stage elaborate domestic scenes for neighbors they barely know? That evening, I watched the Henderson house more carefully. Used my binoculars to look through their windows, study their movements, try to understand what they were really doing. The family was in the living room, arranged around the television like a normal evening at home. But they weren't watching anything. The TV was off. They were just sitting there, staring at a blank screen, not moving, not talking. For 3 hours. At 9 p.m., the lights went out on schedule. At midnight, I saw the basement lights again. This time I was ready. I had positioned a ladder against the back of their house, right below a basement window. When the lights came on, I climbed up and looked inside. The basement had been converted into some kind of laboratory. Stainless steel tables, chemical equipment, industrial ventilation systems. And bodies. Lots of bodies. They were arranged on the tables like an assembly line. Different stages of preservation, different levels of decay. Some looked fresh. Others were obviously ancient, mummified by whatever process the Hendersons were using. Mr. Henderson was working on a middle-aged man, injecting something into his arms, adjusting his position on the table. Mrs. Henderson was documenting everything, taking photos, making notes on a clipboard. The kids were helping, passing tools, holding limbs steady. Acting like this was the most normal thing in the world. They weren't preserving bodies for burial. They were preserving them for display. I climbed down and ran back to my house, grabbed my phone, started to call the police. Then I realized the Henderson minivan was in my driveway. They had seen me watching. They knew I had discovered their secret. I'm writing this from a motel room 50 miles from Pine Street. I've been driving for 6 hours, switching cars twice, paying cash for everything. But I don't think it matters. The Hendersons aren't just a family with a strange hobby. There's something else entirely. Something that moves from place to place, setting up temporary operations, collecting bodies, perfecting their preservation techniques. The perfect suburban family is just a disguise. A way to blend in while they work. And now they know I've seen too much. The news report came on an hour ago. House fire on Pine Street. For bodies found in the basement, identities unknown. The Henderson family is missing, presumed dead. But I know better. The bodies they found were just the latest additions to their collection. The real Hendersons are still out there, probably already scouting their next neighborhood, looking for their next laboratory, and their next neighbors who ask too many questions.